Thank you. Thank you very much. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, dear colleagues. Welcome to the second day of the uh, evidence-based VR workshop. So I will start with a recap of yesterday's discussion and the session. Yesterday we had covered three sessions on how to preparing an evidence-based voluntary national review. The first session is on national SDG monitoring mechanism and process. So first, I provided the overview on the importance of have a coordinated SDG monitoring mechanism and the monitoring process in the preparation for evidence-based VNRs. And I also discussed the challenge identified in the past VNR preparations. This is also got confirmed in our small polls in the discussion session. In the discussion session, and 93 of the participants answered the poll, saying that they have a coordinated SDG monitoring mechanism. And among those having a coordinated mechanism, and the National Statistical Office taking a leading role in this coordination process. In terms of the addressing the challenges, the participants also echoed the challenges identified in the VNR. In particular, the participants identified data disaggregation, data availability, coordination, and also the pandemic among one of the most significant challenges in preparation the VNRs. And so I also provided some practical guidelines on how the data sharing, how to collect data, and agreement between agencies. And also touch upon the usefulness of the development of a data roadmap for regular monitoring and review of VNRs, and for monitor SDG and preparation of the VNRs. So after that, we had two countries share their experience. The first one is Miss Yaqub from Egypt. She discussed institutional arrangement for SDG monitoring in Egypt government, and in particularly the Egypt Statistical Office regular monitor SDG and release SDG report in 2018 and 2019. And they also have a SDG dashboard in the countries, and also localize the SDG produced SDG report as a local level. And the statistical office also produced the country's national strategy for development of statistics. They also created the Egypt's SDG Observatory dashboard with the support UNICEF. And following that, Ms. Yashida from Minister for Affairs Japan also explained their monitor review process, which is led by the Prime Minister Office currently. They also have a legal framework for the monitoring process, and also has a lot of promotion and bring awareness of the SDG monitoring to the general public. They increase the regular review, the data availability of the SDG monitoring, bring the availability of data to almost 6% on the indicator process. So in the discussion, I think that there's a few countries also share their experience, and Sarah from Sweden, and I think Spain and also Egypt emphasize a few more things. I think a few takeaway from this discussion is monitoring and SDG should be a regular activity instead of just for the preparation for the VNRs. This will help increase the data availability and review of the monitoring, and the process is easy if it's become a regular annual review of SDGs. And the monitoring process is should be a very coordinated process with the local government, with all stakeholders, partners, and this also facilitate the review with the international agencies. So this is session 1, and in session 2, we cover the how to assessing and the reporting and the impact of COVID-19. My colleague had a page elaborate on how to include the COVID-19 coverage in the VNR, including discussing data challenges and a plan to deal with these challenges, and how VNR how the 2021 and VNR should report on the pandemic, and give a couple of suggestions and highlight the goals, effect, and action for recovery. And we also heard a couple of country experience, and the first one is from Spain, and Ms. Gallego from Minister of Social Rights and the 2030 Agenda, and particularly emphasize the government post the COVID, which is to leave no one behind, and how the government has introduced the social support and other measures to back up the goals, and initiate government partnership and dialogue to help to reinforce agreement on and the solidarity towards rebuild from the pandemic. And Ms. Carmen Saura provided the adaptation to data collection within the National Institute of Statistics in response to the pandemic. And they replaced many of the face-to-face interviews with either telephone or web versions, and other innovation method of data collection has been introduced, such as use credit card transaction of data to measure consumption. And she also stressed that communication was an important consideration with a press release about COVID-19, and a data section was also on COVID-19 added to the statistical website. And next we have a presentation from Myanmar. Ms. Mao from the Central Statistical Office discussed the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the monitoring and on data production in Myanmar. The government of Myanmar also introduced a COVID-19 economic relief plan, and he also discussed technology for monitoring and reporting on COVID-19 in Myanmar, and which include a high frequency phone survey to assess the social economic impact of COVID-19 on households. And they also create a COVID-19 high frequency dashboard, and survey result will be disseminated through this COVID-19 monitoring platform. I think in the discussion, and a couple more countries shared that they need to change the data collection method due to the COVID-19, adapt to these challenges, and provide the data to the regular monitor. In session 3, we cover the integrated new data sources and data innovation for official statistics and partnership with stakeholders. My colleague Luis Gonzalez Mozales discussed the advantage for National Statistical Office of using innovative data source for SDG monitoring and reporting, and the way to use statistical for non-official sources. he noted that the pandemic can catalyze collaboration for new data. He also stressed the importance of clearly linking statistics from innovative methods to SDG reporting, also include the data quality assurance. He described the data integration principles that must be adhered to when using innovative data sources and emphasize the trust in data and the user engagement for innovative project. And after that, Ms. Niels Plow from Statistical Denmark um, explained the Statistical Denmark mainly use administrative data and the advantage of using this administrative data collection over other data method in order to build the administrative data system. There's a need of a backup by the solid and thorough comprehensive registration system in the countries. And after that, Ms. Karen and Chavez from Colombia discussed the institutional and legal framework of SDG review in Colombia. She particularly emphasized several innovative sources and methods used in Colombia, including the use of satellite images and the integration of statistical and geospatial information. And in Colombia, they also create SDG indicator parameter, which measure whether indicator data is available or the reporting stage for data for indicators. So other innovative approach were poverty mapping and the use of night lights as a proxy measure for economic activity in the country. She also discussed the quantity framework of Danny, which have developed for non-traditional statistical data sources. So this is a recap for yesterday's discussion for colleagues who either didn't have opportunity to fully participate yesterday's discussion. Today we have a little bit more time. We will cover two sessions. The one session is on data disaggregation and leaving no one behind. And the second session is on communicating data in VNRs and engage data user. So before I start the first session for today, I will like to ask the participant if they want to provide comments or any questions for yesterday's three sessions. I will have the floor open.
Hi, Ms. Yonge. I send you a question.
Yeah, I say a question from Qatar said, do you recommend a methodology to measure the performance of the target and then the entire goals? There's some methodology exists such as the index because, for example, SCAP Regional Commission and also compiled the index to measure the goals and uses the selected indicators for the goals. So this is one methodology that can be possible. And among the IG members, there was discussion of we called goal level indicators at a certain point that select a few indicators that can be represented the goal. This is probably another approach. I think there's probably I don't know if the other country has experience to share on how to measure the performance of the entire goal in particularly. And for the performance of target, in many targets, if there's only one target, that's probably the best way to measure. If there's like a couple of indicators to measure the target, a dashboard is a way to measure the target. I don't know if the other country want to share the experience on how to measure the performance of entire goals. Anyone want to share their experience? Okay, I don't see any. And the USC also is currently working and to see if we can recommend a methodology to help country if they want to compose their own index, and what's the consideration and robustness. I think that there in Europe there's also a lot of the methodology, particularly the European Research Center has developed some methodology on how to develop indexes. And so we had a brown bag seminar on this topic, which we can post on the global network of data officer and the statistician.
Yeah. Another question related to the end value of some indicators. It's not identified. So is it a national exercise? We should do it?
I'm sorry, what value you said?
Yeah. As you are aware, we have many indicators. It should be zero, no poverty, like no poverty. Some of the indicators should be 100. Some of the indicators should be, let's say, reduced 50%. And the fourth measure is to identify, let's say, the agreements which any country signed on. But some of the indicators for the end value, it's not identified by the working group yet. So identifying the end value, because we have the current value, let's say, for some of the indicators, but we don't know the end value, the target value. So is it a national exercise? We have to do it?
Yep, this is a very good question. And you're talking about the numerical target or quantitative target of the goals. This is actually should be defined by the national government because each country has their unique situations, and although some is very clear. For example, as you mentioned, the zero hunger and the zero poverty. That is clear that all countries should aim to reduce all the poverty and the hunger. But for many others, for majority of the target, they should be national defined based on the national circumstances and priorities.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So without further ado, I will start the first session. And I also would like to take this opportunity to mention we established a global network of data officers and statisticians. And my colleague Yu Xi just posted the link of this network. If you are interested in join, and just please join the network. Currently, the network has 1,000 members of statisticians and data officers. So I will hand this session to my colleague Heather Page to moderate the session on data disaggregation and leaving no one behind.
Thank you, Young-Yi. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Heather Page. I work in the team with Young-Yi Min here in UNSC on SDG monitoring. So we will start today with session 4 on data disaggregation and leaving no one behind. As Young-Yi mentioned, this This topic is one that a lot of respondents noted they needed additional assistance with. So we hope that the session will be useful for participants. This session will focus on how countries identify national data disaggregation priorities and define tools and practices to improve the collection of disaggregated data. And we hope to discuss and hopefully identify data sources and policy priorities with data for ensuring leaving no one behind. So the first presentation will be by my colleague, Ms. Yongyi Min, and so I will pass the ball back to her. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather. So I will probably give an overview and maybe suggest a step-by-step approach to address the data disaggregation. Next slide, please. So we know that due to age, socioeconomic status, gender, ethnicity, and geographic, many vulnerable groups tend to be excluded from access to good education, healthcare, electricity, and safe water, and other critical services. That's one of the reasons that when adopting the 2030 agenda, a member state pledge to leave no one behind and to reach the furthest behind first. So existing statistics typically only capture the national, subnational, or even city average. But this average often masks a disparity at the community and the household or individual groups levels. The challenge is that those who are the most vulnerable are often uncounted. That they do not exist in official records, increase their vulnerability, and may leave them further behind. Therefore, implementing the SDG require a radical different approach. Second, the next slide, please. So at present, many countries lack basic data such as a comprehensive civil registration and the vital statistical system. For example, those living in poverty are most likely to be excluded. The first 20% of the global population currently account for 55% of unregistered births. The government cannot ensure that everyone is included in the program if they do not know they exist in the first place. So better data are fundamental for targeted resources at any poverty and deliver public service and good for all. And there's many reasons that why that the many of this vulnerable population are excluded accounted. For example, there's an incomplete coverage due to sample size and cost. Some population live very remote area, they're hard to reach. Some ethnicity group are small and they're difficult to capture in sample survey. And many household surveys will not include institutional populations. And survey data are collected at the household level and risk ignoring intra-household disparities. A school-based survey will be confined to children attending school. This is also linked to the administrative data may only cover those enjoying the service. And collection of data on some of the characteristics may be legally preclude in some countries, such as religion or ethnicities. So this is some of the reasons why some of the vulnerable population are excluded in the official statistics. Next slide. So we suggest step by step wise and to generate the disaggregate data for SDG monitor. The first step is identify the vulnerable populations. This will be based on the national context. Here we list some of the vulnerable populations, such as the poor, women, girls, youth, old persons, person with a disability, migrant. This is a not exhaustive list. This is will be mainly based on national priorities and national content. Some of the vulnerable populations will change. For example, the COVID pandemic will add additional vulnerable populations, such as healthcare workers and healthcare and essential workers, and informal workers in current situation and can be counted as vulnerable population groups. And next slide, please. And the step 2 will be identify the priority for those vulnerable groups. I just gave a couple of examples. The first example is a policy priority for women and girls, and this is identified by the major women groups. There are 5 policy priorities. First, on poverty eradication, and second is the food insecurity and health, and the third is on education, and the fourth one, access to economic resources and decent work for all, and also the last one is gender impacts of climate change. The second example is on policy priority for older persons identified by major group on older person. The first one is on health. We know population aging is transforming economies and society across the world, and older people experience significant deficit in health and well-being, and face a range of barrier access health service. The second is income security. Older age often precarious time in terms of income security, and the social pension provide important source of regular income for older person. And then they identify violence, abuse, and safety, and as one of the policy priority, and also empowerment and participate as a full member of the society. And older people reported the discrimination on the basis of their age was a regular and common experience in their lives in many countries. So they often want to be included in the full society. So this is a couple examples of the policy priorities identified for the vulnerable populations. Next slide, please. And when we identify the policy priorities, we notice there's a lot of common policy priorities across many of the vulnerable population group, such as reduce poverty, access to protection, access to basic service, inclusive education, access to employment, access to housing, access to justice. The policy priority identified by many of the vulnerable populations. And in addition, we want to, next slide, please. We want to notice that the Leaving No One Behind approach aims to identify not only who is left behind, but also the ways in which the marginalization and exclusion are experienced. So the analysis across the country of who's being left behind also demonstrated that the most disadvantaged are those who face the compounded effects of different forms of discrimination. For example, the factors that contributed to women and girls' disadvantage do not operate in isolation. So difference related to wealth, location, and ethnicity, in this case, combined to create deep pockets of deprivation across a range of SDGs, from access to education and healthcare to clean water and decent work. Sorry, next slide, please. Yeah, this is we talk about the intersectionality of inequality. Next slide, please. So the step 3, we want to link policy priority to the national SDG indicators. This is an example that we use at the global level. So we use an example like a policy area for person with a disability that we link it to the global indicator list for poverty, for example, on poverty eradication for persons with disabilities. There's a few 4 indicators that directly link to this policy priorities, and we identify this SDG indicators. Next slide, please. So there are a few tools and can be used that to link this policy priority to national SDG indicators. The data, so it's we need to identify a process of policy and data integration. Here we list a couple of tools that can be used to review to monitor national policies and SDG indicator. The first one is called EPIC tool that is developed by SCAP. It's a tool based on framework for structured participatory and principle-based dialogue between policies and data stakeholders. And the second one is ADAPT tool developed by Paris 21 to support the process of indicator development when there's agreement on policy targets. And there's also the stacked by UNITAR and the UN Statistical Division, and also the data for SDG toolbox by GPSDDs. So there's a couple of tools. We provide also link to the tool to facilitate the process of policy and data integrations. And the next slide, please. And so the next step will be map data sources and analyze the data availability. So we know that many countries, particularly the least developing countries, report that they do not have disaggregator reported on many of the priority indicator, and even some country with advanced statistical system, the data is not always available at the required level of disaggregation for all vulnerable populations. So the first step is gap analysis or data availability assessment will help identify the available data sources for the vulnerable population groups. The traditional data source is the population census, CRVS, and administrative records and household service. And there's more and more data source and technology, such as mobile phone devices, Earth observations, and more country from yesterday. We also hear that the integration of a different the data source to fill data gaps is one approach. Next slide, please. And here's also we use the global database and the global indicator as an example. The current available and the future planned data disaggregation in the global indicator. So on disability status, for example, the primary data source for calculate this indicator is from for indicator 1.3.1 is from administrative data set maintained by the National Ministry of Labor, and it's available for a couple disaggregation dimensions, but for majority that of the indicators, they're not currently available, but there's a plan for future availability. Next slide, please. So the next step is collecting and disaggregator and the production of the disaggregator and the inclusion in the VNRs. Here I show a couple of country experience in the production of disaggregated data and highlight them in the VNR. I think the first example is from UK. And UK, leaving no one behind is a core principle of the goals. So VNR includes example of activities to understand who is being left behind, including how they produce the data through audits, everybody counts project and other programs. So this example I included in the leaving no one behind example for every goal, as well as the data picture example, which also incorporate disaggregated data. And for example, in Moldova, their VNR notes the commitment by the country to increase investment in the development of a national system for production, collection, and analysis of quantitative data disaggregated. Some disaggregated production include a child focus indicator to monitor the SDG and national policies, national statistical women and men in ICTs, poverty mapping at the lowest possible subnational level. So throughout the VNR and its company statistical for the SDG document, a chart table which include disaggregated data to further illustrate the situation of vulnerable population. Next slide, please. So the last step will be use of disaggregator to identify needs to design the better policy. We know that disaggregated data is an essential aspect for developing policy and assisting in decision making. So there's a loop. So they will feedback for policy making. We also provide a couple examples. In Uganda, the use of gender statistics, for example, the review of gender policy and development of the new policy was informed by reprocessed gender equality indicator. The review of their second national development plan is making use of the reprocessed gender equality indicator and will inform priority of its next 5 years national development plan. And the gender equality indicator has also been integrated into the national standard indicator framework, which inform planning, budgeting, monitoring, and reporting on government programs, including SDG progress and other reports. In the case of Republic of Moldova, the reuse of SDG in data for urban mobility plan incorporating various data on urban trends from Earth observation and the census data for the development of an urban mobility plan to ensure affordable and sustainable transport system. To produce more granular data requires that national policy framework, and in particular national development plans incorporate systematically the need to produce disaggregated data in order to deliver and evaluate the effectiveness of policy and program. National statistical and data strategies and national development plan are often designed separately despite the interlinkage and the synergy between them. I think that we will strongly recommend the dialogue between the data producer and policy here again, and to enable to produce more disaggregated data for policy making. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Young-Yi. Really appreciate the overview presentation on data disaggregation. We'll hold the questions until we finalize the presentation, similar to what we did yesterday. So thank you again. So next, I have just a very short presentation. It's mainly on resources. So the presentation includes links for all of the participants So this is on a compilation of existing tools and resources for data disaggregation. Next slide, please. So since 2015, the Interagency and Expert Group on SDG Indicators, or the IAG SDGs, who were tasked to develop and implement the global indicator framework for the goals and targets of the 2030 agenda, they have included work on data disaggregation in their annual activities. And in line with this work program in 2020 and following the 51st session of the United Nations Statistical Commission, they continued to work on data disaggregation, and they developed a stock-taking questionnaire to identify existing methodologies, guidelines, and tools specific for data disaggregation that have already been developed and agreed by key experts, international groups, mechanisms, and committees. The idea was to try to compile into one place this existing data or these existing tools for data disaggregation. And so for this questionnaire, the participants included established city and expert groups under the Statistical Commission, international expert groups and committees, as well as UN agencies and stakeholders that are already focusing on vulnerable populations, disaggregation dimensions, and also different data collection methods, such as household surveys. Next slide, please. So the current iteration of the compilation includes tools and resources on data disaggregation for the following groups. And this is by far, the information in the compilation is not an exhaustive list, but it's a start. We plan to continue to update this information. This is considered a living document. And in fact, in consultation with many of the agencies and other stakeholders, they've identified other groups that could potentially provide additional information on other groups that have not been included in this iteration. So the full compilation will be available on the IAG SDG website by the end of January 2021, so in just a couple short weeks, and at the following webpage. Next slide, please. So I won't go through each one, but I just wanted to, again, show you here that the presentation is mainly just links with resources for participants, and it includes links to e-learnings, methodological guidelines, measurement frameworks, intersectional analyses, assessments for COVID. Next slide, please. This is for women and girls. The next slide includes children and older persons. It also has, you can go to the next slide, please. And then we have migratory status. And a lot of these are practical guidelines, and they also include modules, capacity building tools, as well as technical reports and other handbooks. Next slide, please. And these are just some of the highlights. Again, the compilation will include a bit more of the information and have quite a bit more detail. Here, I just was including some of the highlights from each of these sections. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. It's just kind of a place to start in case you're looking for some additional tools and resources on data disaggregation. And again, it includes guidance documents, guidance materials, e-learning, checklists and templates. This is for refugees and internally displaced people, IDPs. Next slide, please. Persons with disabilities has quite a bit of information, survey tools, advocacy, working group presentations and webinars, training videos. Next slide, please. And then last we have geographic location and also other and multiple dimensions, so some intersectionality as well. So that is the end of this slide. Again, this is mainly a slide, a presentation with resources so that you have the links, and the compilation will be available at the end of the month at our website. Okay, thank you very much. So next we will move into our presentation for our country experiences, and Mr. Fu Sambas, I apologize for mispronouncing your name, from the Lao Statistics Bureau of Laos will provide a presentation on data disaggregation. So I will give the floor to him now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hitepe. Your pronoun, my name is correct. Okay. So, first of all, I would like to take this opportunity to thank UNSD to invite me to join the important workshop and allow me to share a chance to share allow people telling process on preparing the data for coming VNR. And for this year, will be the second report for Lao PDR. So my name is Pusran. I also focal point for the national implementing the SDG and from the statistics office. So I would like to take a review for 4 points. The first, I would like to recall what the Lao Statistics Office wrote or mandate. Then second, I will tell you the existing of the data source and also what we review of the data availability. And also we share you the facing or what challenging and the way forward. So for the statistics office mandate, we are almost the same with the NSO for each country. Normally, we produce and coordinate the coordination of the official statistics in country, which is support monitoring the national economic development. And with this existing indicator with the SDG and ODC. And we also, the organization is provide official data for the country. And I would like to inform you that for the SDG implementing, allows statistical also who is the lead of the analyze and prepare for the national prepare for the voluntary national reports. And Laos statistical also the member of the national committee for SDG implementing. And for the yesterday, we also have some section about the institutional arrangement. And for Laupida, we the chair for the SDG implementing as the prime minister. Next slide, please. Actually, we are now still based on the traditional data source, which is from the administrative data and our regular census or survey, which already in our strategy. We are not yet to apply for the fully apply for the new data source yet. Even is already existing some new data source, for example, mobile device, social media, or the financial. So that still further follows that is Europe. So for the administrative, we stitch on the line ministry and also in the local province. And we also have some another source, but mostly is based on the administrative data from line ministry report system. And for the census, we have regular census, and I would like to let you know that you can see in the 2009 we review. We have with the 5 type of census, we have around 106 indicators that will be monitoring and develop for SDG indicator. For example, in 2017, under the social under the Laos social indicator survey, we we have 13 indicators, as well as a labor force survey in 2017 around 50 indicators. And this census or survey we already put to the index of the our first VNR in 2019. Next slide, please. This is the what we are review for the national SDG data for our the second VNR. And what we see is we have around total for the preliminary is about 115 indicator. But what is availability already around 18, and the 18 is based on the data, and we working with the administrative data and what the existing data. And this is a very good chance that we ongoing develop with the Lao Statistics SDG team and consultant. Then also view together with the metadata both national and English language. And I also would like to take this opportunity. We working under support by the UNSD FCDO project, which help Lao on the technical assistance. And as the SDG focal point, and on behalf of Lao Statistics Bureau, also would like to thank the UNSD. We support Lao since 2017 for the TA on the SDG indicator. You can see the right hand side on the slide. What the target on the VRR2 will be have 9 cone, and we have one additional from Lao in the cone 18, which we call unexploited ordnance. And we see that around 17 indicators no data available. So we plan to focus only for the around 18 indicator, and how let's say until we have the VNR how can we can develop further. Next slide, please. Now go to the key section for the data this application. What we review now is both challenging and also what we have now. Under the Ligula survey, I already mentioned since 2017 after SG agenda, we have some Ligula census and survey which break to the location as urban, rural, or provincial and region, and also have the sex age group, for example, children, young or old. However, we still think that this is lacking on the age group for the children, which is below 15 or below 18. But this still depend on the survey. Additional, we still have the income, which the measure the poor or break down the consumption. We also have the breakdown on the disability status. However, we still difficulty that disaggregate data also available, but not all is in the standard and guideline. Already showed the presentation by the UNSD, and you see that the SDG, some SDG we have, for example, SDG on the domestic material consumption. We develop some disaggregate material, but very limited by the sector. As well as for the ministry data produced disaggregate is still large, limited location or the by location for the existing data. So next slide, please. With what we have and what we are developing, we think that we still have the long and still facing develop, which is the we need to revise and suggest from the line ministry of the data what we have now. And the second, we will be extend the new data for the disaggregate purpose for our future census or survey. This will be based on the international standard on the data collection or classification and also methodology for compilation. The third, we will look the coverage and completeness and consistency of the data. And of course, we still need to develop out the metadata will be based on the guideline or guidebook from the UNSD. I hope that under the UNSD FCDO projects on the metadata, we will be have both English and Lao. And what now we target around 18 indicators from the tier 1 as we have discussed in the team, I mean in national team on the second VNR. And of course, the last we develop our dimension on, or we adapt the SDG perform. So this is what I would like to share with you. Next slide, please. This is I show you some of existing practice on infography of product, the SDG indicator. Then it will be need to further develop, and we will further develop and help from the consultant and assistant from the TA from the international organization as well as UNSD. So this is the end of my presentation. So if any one have any question, you can ask or share me which one I can immediately answer. Then I welcome to answer. If not, then we can be answered by mail, or we can have another way to discuss further. Thank you very much, Koptai.
Thank you very much. It's actually really interesting here also to see the disaggregation in the infographic. So thank you for sharing that also at the end of the presentation. So we just want to provide an opportunity for participants to, if they have any questions, feel free to either post it in the chat or raise your virtual hand, and we'd be happy to kick off the discussion with any questions for any of the presenters. And there was also a question about presentations, and they are available on the meeting website, which we've posted the link in the chat. No questions? Okay. I'm not seeing any hands. Paul, I don't know if you see anything either, and I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Okay, great. Okay. So moving on to the discussion session for session 4 on data disaggregation. We'd like to split up into breakout groups to discover to discuss the questions that were shared for session 4, looking at policy priorities on vulnerable populations and who is identified in those groups, and then main challenges that countries are facing, and hopefully hearing from countries on their experiences. So my colleague Paul is going to set us up into the breakout groups, and you will have 3 facilitators for those sessions, our colleague Elena and Yushi and myself for the 3 discussion breakout groups. So take it away, Paul.
Yeah, thank you. So we'll see you in a bit. I'll set up the breakout sessions now.
Thank you, everyone. I think we're all back. I hope everyone had fruitful discussions in your breakout groups. We just want to give a couple minutes to allow for just a quick recap from the different breakout sessions. Elena, do you want to start with your group?
Sorry, I was muted. Thanks, Heather. Yes, thank you so much. We had an interesting discussion with some experience sharing from different countries. So in terms of the first question in identifying the vulnerable populations in the country context, and whether there were other groups that were identified with COVID-19 from Indonesia, that of course the poor, those under the national poverty line, have been identified as having increased. So there are policies being put in place to support that larger population, such as cash transfers, as well as Madagascar said that additionally they've added children, such as orphans, and also with COVID-19, they've identified that there are populations that used to conduct business on the roads. And so they are particularly vulnerable because with the lockdowns and the restrictions of mobility, they have no source of income. So that's another vulnerable group that was added. And also Malaysia indicated that they're working on developing new indicators for women to include in the different surveys so that they can capture that as a group. And also, of course, Myanmar also talked about the children populations and others that they are getting generally from the population census. All of their countries talked about cash transfers as programs that they're using. And it's interesting because Madagascar talked about a particularly good example, I thought, of how they're able to capture groups that are not being captured in the reporting from the admin data or from the household surveys, because there's not enough of a strong sample to disaggregate and break down to the vulnerable groups. So at the point where the persons are receiving the cash transfers, there are interviewers there who are asking them additional questions that are allowing to capture some of the information. So that's one of the techniques that has been helpful, but the concern is that this is not necessarily scalable, or perhaps not useful post-COVID-19 to be scaled to kind of the larger vulnerable group in the future. So it'd be interesting to see how to handle that later on. And also Myanmar mentioned the dashboard and how that could be used also as a tool to obtain more data, but there are concerns about representativity of the data because it might not be capturing all of the different sectors of the population. Thanks so much. That's what we had.
Thank you very much, Elena. Sounds like a very interesting discussion. I'm going to give the floor next to Yushi and Youngyi regarding their breakout group.
Okay, hello everyone. So yeah, so during our breakout room, so for the first question, I see Carter actually mentioned that the disability population will be one of the vulnerable groups during the pandemic. And also they actually use the internet because of they are in the when they collect the data for their 2020 census and when they do that, they just one of the approach to use the internet and the call center for data collection, and then when they collect the information, they can actually disaggregate by virus categories. And then I also see that during in the first question there was one of the vulnerable group is the informal sex worker answered by Egypt. And yeah, Yongyi, I'm not sure if you have anything to be added at the moment.
I think also in the particular country situations such as Iraq and for the geographic areas, that area with the terrorist, I think positions is also a particular area that is more vulnerable than the other geographic areas. And Japan also mentioned, I think also among other countries, that women, girls, and children, disabled people are particularly affected by the pandemic. This is true for also for Egypt and Spain. And Spain also mentioned that some of the population group, vulnerable group, such as homeless people, are very difficult to be captured by the data collection because they are not in the register. And so it's very challenging to count this group of population. And in Spain, they also carry out a special survey on disabled people. And you want to, I think in Egypt, I think a very interesting point that colleague shared is they also have a special survey on small and medium enterprise that get affected by the COVID. And they carry out this special survey on the particular population group and to assess their vulnerability and provide financial support. And I think another point mentioned by colleague from Spain is they mentioned census is a very good data source to provide the disaggregated data. And over to you, Heather.
Great, thank you. So for our group, the participants noted, Bhutan noted that in 2016 and 2017, they did a vulnerable assessment study identifying 14 vulnerable groups, and it included many of the conventional vulnerable group categories, such as persons with disabilities. But they also noted that during COVID-19, additional vulnerable groups have included the daily wage earners, who are now dependent on government cash transfers, similar to what Elena was saying, and also those who are workers in the informal economy. Iraq noted those affected in particular by COVID, women, persons with disability, but also those that are forcibly displaced, and that the data collection during the pandemic is obviously very difficult, and it's hard to reach some of these sources of data. In in advance of their second VNR, they are working now to try to develop a proper methodology for the VNR on the data, on the disaggregated data. In addition, Madagascar noted that for some of the ways in which they are working with other stakeholders is that they've worked with their NCOs, and these are different stakeholders on data for persons with disability or gender equality. These are groups that are part of their various laws, and they're trying to cover this data, and they work with these different groups to streamline the data and highlight the policies that therefore need to be taken during COVID to try to address these groups. And in addition, one of the last interventions was also by Bhutan, noting that the National Statistical Bureau is authenticating all of the data and that they're embedding or trying to integrate the SDG data into their normal periodical surveys and censuses. And in particular, they're having to get quite a bit of different data where they're having challenges because the normal data collection is very difficult and connectivity is difficult. But for COVID, they're having to find even newer groups. For instance, for vaccinations, they need to find the number of pregnant women or those that are breastfeeding in order to kind of work on their vaccine rollout. So additional, even more disaggregated data from their group. Okay, so I think that was my group. I would like to thank all of the participants for their participation, active participation in the breakout groups. We recognize that it's a little tricky virtually, but we really appreciate your engagement. So we actually have a short break now of about 5 minutes. And if you have any additional questions from this session, feel free to throw them in the chat when we get back, and we can always address them, or any of the presenters as well. And then we will move on to session 5 after we return. So if you can come back in about 5 minutes, we'll see you then. Thank you so much.
So, dear colleague, we'll come back after your short break. So we'll move on to session 5 on communicating data in VNRs and engage data user. So this session will focus on how best to analyze, use, and communicate data and present the data in the VNRs. So in addition, we will ask the participant to share experiences and good practice on user engagement and data literacy in the VR process. So I will give the first presenter will be my colleague Elena de Jesus. She will provide a presentation on communicating data in VRs and engage data users. Over to you, Elena.
Thank you so much, Youngie. And I also work at UN Statistics Division with my colleagues here in the Development Data and Outreach branch. My presentation today will be on communicating data in VNRs and engaging data users. Next slide, please. So as we know, data and statistics form the backbone, essentially, for SDG monitoring and reporting, including the VNRs. Because without quality data, we can't adequately assess progress made and we can't pinpoint remaining gaps. But while data may exist in national statistical offices or the line ministries that collect it, there's often a disconnect between policymakers and statisticians. And because this is a multi-stakeholder process, the preparation of the VNR provides an opportunity to not only bridge this gap, but to also engage various stakeholders in a broad discussion of progress towards the SDGs that is informed by evidence and data. And this in turn increases transparency and trust. Next slide, please. So how do we engage with our stakeholders and users of our data? Next slide, please. So first we need to understand who our users are and what their needs are in order to effectively tailor our data communications. VNRs are a key tool for accountability for the SDGs at both the national and global level. So as a result, we have a very wide range of stakeholders, which includes researchers, policymakers, media, civil society, local governments, private sector, international organizations, so on and so forth. And each of these groups have their specific needs in relation to data and the preferred formats, in which they would like to receive data. So for example, researchers might want to have microdata with detailed metadata that they can use to analyze certain trends or just really dig deep into the data. But for example, policymakers might want policy briefs that kind of summarize the key points that they can then take forward. And then, for example, civil society might want to have some sort of brochures or training materials that they can employ in local languages to reach their the public that they serve. Next slide, please. So we have to be aware of all of these different needs in communicating our data. But we can't assume that we know what our users need unless we ask them, right? So engaging with users implies a two-way communication and a feedback loop rather than this one-way dissemination of statistics, as is often the case. Establishing an open dialogue with users and receiving their feedback builds trust, and this leads to increased use of data in decision-making. And user engagement also involves helping users understand their needs. So particularly when it comes to assessing data critically, understanding data quality considerations, interacting with our users can help them improve their statistical literacy and allow them to use data more effectively to meet their needs. And also engaging with users opens up possibilities and opportunities for collaboration to increase data availability and to improve data quality. So for example, an agency that collects data might not have sufficient resources or capacity to perform a certain kind of analysis. But if it partners with a research institute, this could facilitate that analysis and lead to insights that could benefit both the institute and the agency. Next slide, please. So user engagement during the pandemic, of course, presents added challenges. But over the last several months, we've had to kind of deal with our current circumstances, and we've learned to adapt somewhat. So there's a number of modalities that can be used to engage with users in this setting, such as virtual conferences, focus groups, online surveys, social media campaigns. You can do toll-free lines, engage via radio shows, etc. So it doesn't have to be face-to-face necessarily. And also the VNR process itself is this opportunity because, as you know, the VNR report is just a report of the outcome of the process. But during the process, we should be engaging with our data users from the very beginning so that they are included. Next slide, please. One particular means of engagement, I think it deserves special mention, and we've also heard today from our presenter regarding the different dashboards that are, yesterday we heard from Myanmar regarding their dashboard that they're using. So the SDG data platform or the National Reporting Platform or dashboard can be used to compile, disseminate SDG indicators from one place. So it makes it very convenient for users to access. And so this allows the data to be visualized, the users can interact with it, they can construct different kinds of graphs, and they can even take the visualizations and maybe embed them into their own materials. So this is very useful and can really support the VNR. There are a number of already developed platforms that are being used out there. So in the African region, there's the Open Data Platform developed by the African Development Bank. So a number of countries are using this to disseminate their SDG data. As you can see here on the left, there's Mozambique's portal. And also there's Open SDG, which countries have also been using extensively. It's developed by the Office of National Statistics of the UK. And so you see on the right here, Kyrgyzstan's example implementation. And I think also Lao, who presented today, will be using this platform as well. So this is a really great tool to support the VNR. Next slide, please. So from past HLPF VNR sessions, we've seen that not only can data be used to more extensively support the narrative, but also that there's an opportunity to include data in ways that make it more understandable to a wide range of users. So charts, infographics, and statistical annexes help underpin the VNR reports in order to convey data in a more easily readable format. So I'm going to present a few very brief tips on how this can be done. Next slide, please. So in general, it's important to present readers with the most important information first and to provide summaries and lead paragraphs because as we know, readers lose interest quite quickly. So you want to be able to get the key messages across even if they're skimming. So keeping things simple, this applies to text as well as tables and charts, using clear, concise, simple language. This doesn't mean that you're making it kind of too simplified or dumbing it down. But a plain language really puts the focus on getting the message across to the widest range of users. And just to make it concise and put any details that you might want to include in a statistical annex or an annex with references at the end. So yes, thank you. So presenting charts and tables. So your charts and tables is important that they should be able to stand alone. So whether they're published within a report or they're on your web page, you should assume that media will capture it and reproduce it somewhere else in an article. So all of the key elements need to be there so that they accompany the chart and so that it can be interpreted correctly. So the title, the units of measure, the footnotes, the sources should all be there that can be reproduced in other places. And also for summary tables, in the body of the report, they should be concise to illustrate the narrative, and then larger reference tables can be included in the statistical annexes. Next slide, please. For charts, they're very helpful in visually demonstrating comparisons of magnitude, changes over time, distribution of phenomena, correlations between different phenomena, and how some items compare to the total. So a good chart is generally visually appealing. It's simple. It illustrates the narrative by highlighting some salient points. And it's best to avoid using unnecessary graphical features such as like 3D, different shading, patterns, etc., that complicate the message, or using complex chart types that maybe the average person doesn't know how to interpret. So really make it simple, visually appealing. Use a uniform kind of color schemes, etc. Next slide, please. And it's very important to make sure you're not misleading, and maybe unintentionally, when creating charts. So as we know, sometimes just modifying the y-axis can really create a different visual of the same data. So on the left, we see a y-axis that starts at 0 and goes to 150. So it looks like there's a overall stable trend for about 10 years, and then there's a little bit of a growth. But then if we reduce the y-axis and start it at 95 to go to 115, suddenly we see this very kind of dramatic increase. So it's important to make sure you're not kind of creating a misleading interpretation of the data. Next slide, please. Infographics. So we've seen some examples. Allow presented a very nice example towards the end of the presentation of infographics that they've been using. Also, we've used some infographics in the SDG report, the graphical publication, over the years. So they're very powerful. They put key messages together with text with the illustrated data. So they pop out at you. They really capture the user's attention, and they really simplify interpretation. So in terms of suggestions for infographics, it's good to work with graphic designers because it can be tricky to figure out what the best representation of data could be. So for example, you can see here's an infographic on the left that sort of uses a circular diagram to represent poverty levels, and it's not very clear what's happening. And then the one on the right, it's a chart is chosen that is a much better representation of the data. And also the way that the text and the fonts are used can be really assisted by a communications kind of professional graphic designer. And sometimes it's necessary to review and revise. So just kind of running it by different people, different user groups to see how it is interpreted by them, how it comes across, to make sure that it's communicating the messages correctly. Next slide, please. And here's just some examples from the SDG report for 2020. And here you can see also that colors have been used effectively to kind of match the SDG color scheme and to connect the infographic to the specific SDG. There's effective imagery used, font sizes and font colors, and kind of font effects are used to make the messages come across and jump out effectively, I think. So those are just some examples. Something to consider is including infographics in the VNRs. And next slide, please. And that's all I have. This is just a brief look at how to ensure that we're engaging with users and considering their data needs in their VNRs, and how to communicate with users in a user-friendly manner. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn over it back to Young-Yi.
Thank you very much, Lena, for the presentation. So I'll move on to the country experience. So I would like to invite Ms. Roslawati Yahya from Department of Statistics from Malaysia to share Malaysia's country experience on communications and engagement of data users. Over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Yohi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, good morning and good afternoon and good evening to all. I am Roslawati Yahya from Department of Statistics Malaysia. Thank you for inviting Malaysia to share experience regarding communicating data in VNR and engaging data user. For the purpose of presentation, Malaysia will be sharing our experience regarding the statistical communication and engagement with agencies in the context of SDG Indicators Report 2019, we've published in December 2020. So I will touch on background of the SDG Indicators 2019 report, statistical communication and engagement. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, next slide. Okay, DOSM has published the second SDG Indicators report on 10 December 2020. This report presents 128 available indicators with additional 37 new indicators. 28% of the indicators produced by DOSM, while the remaining 72% are from other ministries and agencies. For the first time, this publication also contains 18 indicators at the district level. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, next slide. For the statistical communication, actually we promote our product through a FB account. It is estimated that there are 11.8 million Facebook account holders in Malaysia. This opens a good opportunity for DOSM to enhance and statistical literacy to the public. DOSM relies on the social media to reach them. Prior to the release, DOSM will promote the upcoming release by alerting public through teaser via media social. DOSM also hold the visual press conference (PC) as one of the new norm initiative. Currently, DOSM has Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and also YouTube account. Okay, next slide, please. This is an example for infographic and media statement of the latest statistic will be circulated via social media and email. Okay, next slide. Okay, DOSM also surveys cover data dissemination via multiple platforms. For instance, eStatistic offers free download services for all DOSM publications. My Local Stat interactive visualization offer user a fun experience in browsing the socio-economic data up to district level. My Local Stat also available in mobile app and the data published until district level, and the user can download a free publication. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is eStatistic page for SDG publication free download. The publication is available in PDF and Excel format. So the user can download all publication through this portal. Okay, next slide, please. Actually, this is SDGs indicators are also available via SDG dashboard. The dashboard consists of 81 statistical indicators, and currently the dashboard is being updated to the latest indicators and also interface. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, for your information, on 10 December 2020, the Minister of the Prime Minister Department Economy, Datuk Sri Mustafa Muhammad, has officiated a launching ceremony of Sustainable Development Goal SDG Indicators Report Malaysia 2019 and SDG 2020 webinar. The session was attended by representatives from ministries and agencies, head of department, state secretary, local authority, NGO, CSO, academia, student representative council, association, United Nations, and representative from member of parliament. And SDG webinar 2020 involved expert panel from local and abroad to discuss SDG related issues and future hopes, as well as the continuity of SDG goal and actions globally and nationally. And this webinar was attended by 400 participants nationwide. The webinar was conducted in 2 sessions at the national and international levels. The first webinar session was entitled Sustainable Development of the Hope of the Future Generation, moderated by Professor Datuk Dr. Muhammad Ghazali Abbas, Professor of Practice, Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia, while the second webinar entitled 2030 Agenda, Bringing the Nation for Better Global Sustainability was moderated by Mr. Stephen Prinsner, United Nations Residence Coordinator for Malaysia. That is the event that we conducted last year. Okay, Chief Statistician Malaysia also delivered the presentation entitled Towards Agenda 2030, Where Are We? We present the essence of SDG Indicator Report 2019 and the achievement of the country's SDG. Okay, next slide please. As a focal point of SDG indicator development, it crucial for DOSM to carry out engagement with the agency as well as the user. Our engagement session with agencies start from 2015 until 2017 to assess the availability of SDG indicators. And in 2018, DOSM has published the initial assessment of SDG report. The engagement session continue for the SDG indicators data collection and SDG indicators development. SDG has engaged with 29 users or data provider. From the engagement session, DOSM managed to publish our first SDG report in 2019 and 99 available indicators, and second SDG report in 2020 with 128 available indicators with the additional of 37 indicators. Okay, next slide please. In 2020, DOSM has undertaken engagement session with NGO, CSO and private sector. The engagement with Iskandar Regional Development Authority, IRDA, Urbanize, and All Party Parliamentary Group Malaysia, APPGM, for the SDG localization. And DOSM and IRDA are currently developing localized SDG indicators for Iskandar Malaysia, Johor, with the involvement of local authorities and district officers. Urbanize is currently preparing Malaysia SDG cities report at local level, and the report is a framework to encourage a bottom-up approach in developing local action plan that will accelerate the SDG achievement. Docent is invited to contribute in the preparation of SDG cities report. For the APPGM, docent will contribute in providing the population statistic, number of establishment, employment, and number of public facilities, example, hospital, schools, by local area of APPGM to support the implementation of the SDG project for the 10 designated area. And docent and urbanized will collaborate effort for further access to critical data and informating sharing. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you, and thank you very much for your attention. That's all from DOSA Malaysia.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rose Lavati, to share your country experience. It's a really good experience on how to improve your data and disseminate, communicate the data in the report. And also you shared how to engage your data providers and data users. Thank you very much. So before I open the floor for questions, I see one question from the chat. Maybe I will ask that question first. The question is from Myanmar. The question is, I would like to ask VNR second time country or third time country, I guess in this case, such as Lao, PDR. How do you improve your first time and second time presentation? And what's the same and the focus or data update? So I guess I will give the floor to Lao PDR first, and then to other second or third time VR presenter countries to answer these questions. Over to you, Paul. Can you answer this question?
Thank you very much, Yoongi, and thank you for our colleague from Myanmar. Actually, we are now in the preparation for the second report for PNR. For the question, what the first VNR we focus on mostly, we report on the institutional arrangement for the country, and we also in the report also mentioned on the progress on each indicator on the SDG and the challenge, which if we found that the way forward for refer to the first SDG is still what I mentioned with my presentation on the disaggregate data. So what the second we foresee that we intend to see the trend analyze, and we also based on the national policy on economic and social development plan. So for the second report of VNR, we will be in line with the Lao Social Economic Development Plan 5 year, which will be adapt in this year, in hopefully in March. So what the team we will focus on, as I understand that we also refer to the high level political forum in 2020 or for this year, and also refer to the availability of our data. For example, we will see the progress. I give you the one example of the SDG indicator 1.2, for example, poverty reduction. And 1.2.1 is a percentage of the population living below the national poverty line. In the first VNR, we get the household and expenditure consumption in 2020 and 23, and we update. We found that the poverty line is 20.2. And the last survey in 2018-19 will be 18.3. It means this will be tell us how progress in the SDG 1 indicator. So in my conclusion, I will share that we will based on the national priority, we based on the data availability and the theme of the this year for the high political forum. That will be select for our data update and for the SDG, the second report on SDG. I'm not sure that I share is meet the question from our colleague from Myanmar or not. Thank you, Yong Yi.
Thank you, Paul. I think I forgot to mention we actually we had originally another presentation from colleague in Zimbabwe who would like to share their how they develop a user engagement strategy. I think due to technical difficulty and the expert cannot join the session, but we can share the presentation from Zimbabwe on how to develop a user engagement strategy. Apologize for forgot to mention that. So I may give the floor to other second or third time VNR presenters, maybe to also address this question. I think Malaysia maybe you can also you will be the second time VNR presenters. Maybe you can answer this question on how to improve your first time and second time presentations. So, Miss Rose Lavetia, maybe can you also just elaborate? I think you covered in your presentation a little bit the improvement. Maybe if you can elaborate how you improve from the first time.
Hello, Miss Yong Yi.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Actually, for the second time publication for the SDG 2019, we collaborate with more agencies and ministry, and we do a lot of engagement with them, and always communicate with the agency and promote them to produce more indicators. Actually, for Malaysia, more indicators for the last year we get from the Ministry of Health, and they also produce a publication of SDG. More we get from that ministry. And other ministry, we also encourage them to provide available data, and if data is not available, we discuss with them and discuss which is metadata that they not clear, and always encourage and communicate with them. That's why the collaboration with agency, we need collaboration with agency because we do not have more data in DOSM. Like last year, we only have 28%, and only from DOSM, and 72% from agency. That's all, Yongyi.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much sharing your experience in improve coordination and collaboration with other agencies. I also say from the chat that Madagascar is also working on data platform form of visualization for SDGs, and hopefully it will be available by the end of second quarter in 2021. So we will move on to the discussion questions. If any a country have a question to the presenter, you can also ask now to either Elena or Ms. Rose Lavati. So the questions for discussion and will be, the first question is, what are the main challenges around presenting data and the statistics in VNRs? So similar question we just talked about for third time presenters. How have you improved the use and the communication of data in the VNRs, and what are the lessons learned from the first report? I think Paul and Ms. Rosa Lavita already addressed some of the questions, and I would like to see if other country would like to share their experiences on this first questions. Oh, I see a hand from this one second, from Bhutan.
Hi. Am I audible?
Yes. Yeah. Go ahead.
My name is Purva, and I work in the National Planning Commission of Bhutan, which is called Gross National Happiness Commission. So if I may take this opportunity to share the second part of the first question, maybe for second and third time presenter, how we would like to improve the communication of data in our VNR. So Bhutan Bhutan will be presenting our second VNR. The first time was in 2018. So we will be presenting our second VNR this summer. So in this VNR, what we are thinking, we have already initiated the process, and stakeholder engagement is about to start as of now. But there is some disruption in our plan because of the extended lockdown that we are undergoing at the moment. So how we are trying to improve from our first VNR is that when we really look back to our the report that we have presented in 2018, the kind of data visualization, the graphs, were very basic one, and it was not so much informative at a glance. We really need to, it was more of a word kind of a thing. It was very at a basic level. So in 2021's VNR, what we are trying to do is to make it more attractive by using different kind of data visualization. Especially, we are on the verge of completing our SDG dashboard. In that dashboard, this is also a little bit delayed because of COVID. Actually, this should be by now functioning, but we are still giving a finishing touch on it. So in that dashboard, what we have is we have a lot of data visualization features already included in the dashboard. So we are hopeful that we will be able to use those dashboard, the features in the dashboard, and make it more attractive, more informative for this time's VNR. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience on improving data visualization and using the SDG dashboard to communicate the data. Next, I have a colleague from Myanmar, Tin Ling. Sorry if I mispronounce your name.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me a floor. Yes, I'm. My name is Chen Lemao. I'm the counselor from the Permanent Mission of Myanmar in New York. I'm not. I'm not very specialist on the data, but I will discuss from the perspective of the permanent missions. Yeah, as you all know, we all are facing the unprecedented challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemics affect all countries at the same pace, but the impact of the pandemic among the countries is different due to their, the response based on their economic development. So the least developed country like Myanmar had us hit by the pandemic. That's why we have to adjust everything we have for the socio-economic development of the country. Now, from the on these topics, we also have to have the difficulties on the data collection. Due to the pandemic, we have to adjust our data collection system, and then we also need to adjust our stakeholder engagement for the Vienna presentation. And then, however, in that case, the ICT will be the key to fulfill our commitment to present the Vienna. But the ICT level in Myanmar has been growing, but we still need to do a lot of things. For example, the lack of the ICT capacity is one of the barrier to have the data from all of the community in the countries. And that's why we have to promote the data, affordable data connectivity. That is the one challenges. And the second challenges we have is we don't know the impact of the COVID on every 17 goal of SDG. We don't know how much impact of the COVID on those goals. So that is the issue we would like to address. And if I'm not mistaken, the Committee for Development Policy is making the study on the impact of the COVID-19, particularly on the least developed country, but which is based on the LDC graduation perspective. So we need to have the clear picture of the impact of COVID on SDG. I think that those are the challenges we have presenting the VNR for the time being. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing your view and also point out the particular challenge in facing by some of the country and in terms of the ICT capacity and also how to assess the impact of the COVID-19 on all the goals. Thank you very much. And any other views and comments from colleagues? Okay, I don't see any hands from the participant. Okay, yeah, I see one from Egypt from Nada. Nada, over to you.
Yes, thank you. So we are presenting the third VNR this year. And so I would like to give a couple of comments on that in terms of data presentation. So some things that worked well for the last VNR that we're planning to take on with us this VNR as well is that first of all, we tackled all 17 SDGs, not just selected ones. And with each SDG, the way that we reviewed this SDG was that we presented selected indicators and with a clear way visually of how the change was, whether it was like a positive change, a negative change, and so on. And it was between 2 points in time. This year we're probably aiming towards a trend more than just 2 points in time, and but this was complemented also with the initiatives or the projects or mega projects and so on that were undertaken either by the government or the private sector or any stakeholders in order to achieve this SDG. And this complementarity between the data and the information about the project and so on worked well with giving a clear picture of where the country stands in this SDG. So I think we're planning on taking the same way of presenting the data this year. We're probably aiming for a better design or formatting, but of course we did not get to this part yet. So this is yet to be, clarified later on. Also, something else is, as I discussed before in my presentation yesterday, we created the SDG Observatory dashboard after the last VNR. So this is definitely going to improve our data presentation because people will then have access to the platform for a more user-friendly way of accessing the data and a more interactive way. And also it will have the data on all the indicators that we have data available for, not just selected ones. There will still be a statistical annex at the end of the VNR. However, the comprehensive data that we have will be on the dashboard. So this is also some way that we improved from the last VNR, and it's going to help anyone to access this kind of data on Egypt. Something else is that for the COVID-19, because we're covering it also in the impact of COVID-19 in the VNR. So we have the policy tracker that was developed on the impact of COVID-19, not the impact, I mean on the policies or measures that were taken to mitigate the impact of COVID-19. And it's mapped, the measures are mapped to the SDGs. So definitely this will be referred to as well in our VNR. We're probably going to use infographics for that as well, or like better data visualization for it. Another point I want to tackle is so the dissemination of information on the VNR after its release. So the last time there wasn't, a specific event for launching it. I saw that a couple of countries did that. The last webinar as well, a lot of countries said that they did that. And I believe this is a great idea to raise awareness about the VNR and for all the stakeholders to notice what the country has been doing in this regard and in achieving the Agenda 2030. So we're thinking of something in this matter, or doing this sort of event. Also, for the dissemination, there's a lot more focus this time on engagement of the youth and like the younger population or younger age group, and also expanding a little the awareness within the geographical area. So we're planning on having like briefs for the VNR to be shared or distributed, just like summaries, to have more people aware of what is in the VNR. And also where there's an idea of having like a forum with representatives from different governorates, with like focal points in each governorate, who will also be kind of responsible for raising awareness through different means or different mediums on the VNR as well. But this idea is still under construction, so I don't know how it will develop at the end. I think that's it. Last time we did like we created a video about the VNR and like the main ideas or the main points in it that was shared later on in several events and also on like some social media platforms. I'm not sure if we're doing this year, but this was also a good way of sharing where what was in the VNR. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your sharing many of the experiences, ideas, the planning for the next VNRs, and think they're all really good, and I think many other countries can learn from it. And So I think from the presenter and also other participants, we already covered the issue on in what way will the information in the VR and SDG implementation be promoted and disseminated to the public in your country. I hear many people mention they have SDG dashboard. They have a platform, a portal for disseminate. They organize different engagement webinars, events, and engage with a special population group such as youth. So I will move on to the third questions, which we just want to understand a little bit on what data element do you plan to include in your 2021 VNRs, such as a statistical annex, chart, and stable infographics, and others. So we create a Slido post on this. So Paul, can you post the Slido? Yeah, link. So we can just quickly want to get access on the Slido poll what you use in your webinars. So if you click on the link and you can select what apply to your country. So just give a couple more minutes for participant to respond to the polls. Okay, I think from the current responses to the poll, we see that a majority of the countries will include table and charts in the VR, and also will have a statistical annex. And also, most of the country will use infographics and to include it in the VNRs. And about 40% would like to link the online data portal, a dashboard. And some also use geospatial analysis and maps. And yeah, this is the response. And from Qatar, that we have a question if we can share the presentation as soon as possible. So we will the meeting website of my colleague can post here already has the presentation from yesterday's sessions. So today after this finished, we will immediately share the presentations from today's sessions. So I would like to conclude the session 5 and maybe give a short conclusion remarks on the workshop. So I would like to thank you very much for your participation and engagement, particular to the colleague who present their country experience and good practice and throughout the workshop. And in today's workshop, we focus on two important issue. One is on data disaggregation, and USD present a step-by-step approach to compile disaggregated data for SDG monitors. We also shared a link to a compilation of different tools and resource for data disaggregations. And in terms of challenges, and Myanmar's also shared their country experience on how to collect data and also disaggregate and also present some of the challenges they face. And on the session on communicate data in arts and user engagement, my colleague Elena shared experience on how to identify users and their different data needs, and also why to engage user and different tools for engage the users, particularly in pandemics. And how to communicate the data in VRs. We also hear the presentation from colleagues in Malaysia to share their very good country experience in presenting, engage with data user, data producers, and present VNRs. So this is a quick summary and recap of today's discussions. So I would like to thank you very much for your participation. So before we close, we will have a short survey on this workshop. So I would like to ask my colleague to post the survey. It will take about 2 minutes to fill the survey to help us to improve the workshop in the future. So if you can take 2 minutes to help us to fill the workshop survey, I will be really appreciated. The link has been shared in the chat, also on the screen. So if you can just take 2 minutes. And also you can provide us a comment what other areas you would like to the future workshop to focus on, and some we can in the future we can organize a workshop for the targeted needs for some countries, and we can also invite experts in particular areas. For example, if you country want to learn more on how to better communicate, design infographics, write storylines, and this is a part of that you would like to learn more, and that we can invite experts and to speak about more, or how to use new data sources. For example, how to use citizen science data, how to use citizen generated data, our new approach to use collaborate with the private sector to use data collected mobile phone data. So you can put that information in the survey, and so we can assess the needs from the participant and try to improve our future workshop, and also try to develop some training material on different aspects of compiling data and statistical for SDG monitoring and the VNR preparations. So I will maybe once again, and thank you for all the colleagues participated and contributed this workshop, and also for my colleague here, Heather, Yuxi, Paul, Elena, for help organizing this workshop. So I wish you all of you a successful VNR 2021 VNRs. And if you need additional help, just let us know, and we will try to provide assistance as much as possible. Thank you very much, and I wish you a good day, a good evening. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you and good night.